What's up, guys? Neil Orfield here, and I'm going to show you how I will be setting up my fantasy cruncher for tonight's showdown slate between the Bengals and the Dolphins. I'll start by adjusting my columns. I have saved a quick view so that my columns in the screen look how I want them to. So I'm just going to go to the quick views, showdown settings, and now I see what I want to see in the middle of the screen with ownership projections, how much I'm using of a player once I've run a crunch, their projections, my projections, etc. Then I'll go into the advanced options, which is where I do most of my work for Showdown. And I do basically just two tabs. It's this groups tab that I'm in right now, and then the general tab is where I usually start. I'll start here with the general tab, show you how I'll be setting up some of my settings. Unique players per lineup. I do 150 lineups, so I keep this at one player. If you're doing fewer than 150, if you're doing, say, 20 lineups, I might set that to two. I think might be the better option there. But with 150, I think I'm comfortable with leaving this at one unique player per lineup. Team salary. I'm not going to put in a minimum salary to be used in my lineups. I don't care if I leave $5,000 on the table. If the lineup looks good and it leaves $5,000 on the table, I'm happy with that. On the other hand, I do set a maximum here just because I want to be a little bit unique in my lineups. We did see this past slate. We saw a lineup that was duplicated 130 times or so won, and they used the max salary, and that's what happens frequently when you use the max salary. I would rather win more money when I win because you need to get really lucky. No matter what lineup you're using, you need to get really lucky to win. So if I'm going to get lucky enough to win, I want to win more money. So I'm trying to get unique. So I do put a number in here for my max salary, something below 50,000. I typically recommend leaving at least $600 on the table. I leave more than that on almost any showdown slate, but I recommend leaving at least $600 on the table. For the purpose of this video, I'm just going to put this in at 49,000. So I'm leaving $1,000 on the table. I can't use more than 49,000 salary in any lineup. Offensive players versus defense. The default is set to 2 players. I'm going to change this to 5 players right away. So I could theoretically have a lineup where I have 5 players from one team going up against just the defense on the other team. Not a lot of people will be using that type of construction. It's not something that's going to happen in a lot of my lineups anyway, but I like for that to be a possibility because we've seen that come very close to winning showdowns before, and it's relatively unique, and it certainly is viable. You know, if an offense doesn't do much from one team, but that defense has that team's defense has a defensive touchdown, there's a good chance that defense is going to be the only player from that team in the optimal. So I like to at least have that as an opportunity in my lineups. Global exposure settings, I keep this at 100%, so I can get 100% of any player in my lineup. I will typically set a cap on just the captain spot, but overall, I just keep this at 100%. And then randomness, you set this according to how much control you want over your lineups. I like to give up some of my control here. Sometimes if I'm looking at my lineups and they're not looking the way I want them to, I will go back and sometimes lower that. But I like to start using the 50% randomness, which is a good amount. And, you know, I lose a little bit of control there over my player pool and over what my lineups look like, but I am totally fine with that. Minimum projection included in calculation currently set to 3. Sometimes I lower that. So currently no player with a projection below 3 will be in my lineup set. They're not even included in the player pool because I have this minimum set here. If you lower that to 2, then it'll be any player who has at least a 2 fantasy point projection could theoretically be included in your player pool. I'm just going to leave this at 3. And then my approach will be changing some projections for players who have below 3 fantasy point projection. I'll just make sure that they have above 3 so that they can make it into my player pool. Players from each team max, I'm going to leave this at 5. I'm totally fine having a 5-to-1 onslaught. I kind of like those lineups, so I will leave that at 5. And those are all the settings that I touch on this general screen. Hey guys, let me take a break here to remind you can get access to all of our Stokastic Plus NFL tools for showdown and single game slates for only $1. Click the link in the description of this video below or use promo code PRIMETIME, that's all caps PRIMETIME, at checkout to get 1 week of our NFL Primetime package for only $1. This includes full access to all the premium content and tools for NFL DFS that we have to offer for showdown and single game slates, including player projections, ownership projections, top plays, lineup builder, and our expert Discord. This offer has been going on for a week now, but today is the last day, so take advantage now. We've got 5 showdown slates coming up. Please note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on and is not included with this promo. And then I'll go to the groups setting, the only other tab I use here, and I'll create a group. And the two groups I set on just about any showdown slate are for the quarterbacks in the captain spot. And I'll start with Joe Burrow here. Joe Burrow as the captain is my key player. So this group is only 4 lineups that have Joe Burrow in the captain spot. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to add every Bengals pass catcher to this group. Tyler Boyd, Mike Thomas, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Asiasi, Wilcox, Samaje Perine, Mixon, Evans. And you can see I'm fairly liberal in what I include in this group. I'm not too concerned about, guys like Devin Asiasi. He might not end up being a player that I want in my player pool anyway. But I just, early in the day, I'm setting these. I don't mind having these guys in here. And if they don't make it into my player pool anyway, it doesn't really hurt me to have extra players in this group. But so the biggest decision I have to make with every quarterback is, what do I want to set this rule as? So currently it says if any key player are used, then use at least one player from this group. So if Joe Burrow's in the captain spot, it's going to use at least one player from this group. Some adjustments you could make, you could say only apply plus minus adjustments. If you click this box, now it doesn't require any player from this group. And currently we're not giving any boost. So it doesn't actually do anything, but you can give, boost to the players. And if you have that box clicked, that's the only thing that this group will do is it'll say, if Joe Burrow is in the captain spot, so for example, your Tyler Boyd, 10% boost to his projection. So he'd basically get a 1 fantasy point boost to his projection. That's all that this group would be saying right now. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to unclick this. I am going to require at least one player from this group to be in every lineup where I have Joe Burrow in the captain spot. The reason being Joe Burrow, he can run a little bit, but he has not been running a ton so far in his career. He's actually up. His rushing has been up slightly so far. I believe he's rushed 15 times for 73 yards, if I'm remembering correctly. I might be off through 3 games. So he's been rushing a little bit more than he has in past years. We'll see. Maybe that sticks. But even if he is rushing a little bit more, that's not enough that he's doing a ton of damage on the ground. So you probably still want at least one pass catcher with Joe Burrow if he's in the captain spot. And I'm going to also, on top of, so I'm requiring at least one, I'm also going to give some boost to all of his receivers. And I'm just going to start by giving 10% boost to most of these guys. So typically here, one thing that I like to do is sometimes I set a bigger boost for players who don't project quite as well. And also the running backs, I actually don't typically want to give as big of a boost to the running backs. Sometimes I don't give any kind of boost to the running backs here. I want to include them in the set, but not necessarily give them a boost for Joe Burrow captain lineups. But I also like to typically give bigger boosts to players who don't project quite as well, or more about salary, I guess, more players that are cheaper, because with guys like Jamar Chase, you have kind of a thin line here. Given his high salary, he's actually more expensive than Joe Burrow is in the flex spot. So you're kind of trying to thread a needle there to have Joe Burrow be the optimal captain, with Jamar Chase still having a big enough game at his 1,100 price tag to make it into the 11,000 price tag to make it into the optimal lineup, because Jamar Chase needs to have a pretty big game to make it into the optimal lineup at his 11,000 salary, but he also can't be, doing significantly better than Joe Burrow. And since Jamar Chase gets, the pass catchers gets more points than the quarterback on every passing play, it's kind of a thin line. So typically you're going to need, Joe Burrow, if he's in the captain spot, to be spreading the ball around. A lot of receivers need to be involved for Joe Burrow to be putting up enough points to be the captain without one of those pass catchers outscoring him. And that's especially the case with the more expensive pass catchers, because, a guy like Mike Thomas, he is 800. He might be in the optimal lineup at his $800 salary with just 5 fantasy points. So less of a concern. But for the guys that are more expensive, they need to do more to make it into the optimal lineup to begin with. So it's more of a thin line there for them to make it into the optimal lineup in the flex, but then not outscore Joe Burrow. So those are that's kind of my thought process in setting larger bumps for the players who don't project quite as well and don't have quite as high of a salary in general. But that's kind of my thought process. And then I give lower boost also to running backs. I give a little bit more of a boost to Samaje Perine here, just because he's more of the pass catching back. He's also fairly expensive, probably not going to be in a ton of my lineups anyway. Haven't decided how I'm approaching that yet exactly. Samaje Perine definitely too expensive for his for his role in the offense. But if he comes in at virtually no ownership, sometimes I like to pay up to be contrarian, even though, he's not a likely outcome kind of guy. But, we've seen Samaje Perine have big spike weeks. And if he's not going to get any ownership due to the, massive price tag, maybe that's a spot where I'll be attacking a little bit. But anyway, I like him better in lineups with Burrow as a captain because he is a pass catching option. So I'll give him a little bit of a bigger boost than Mixon and Chris Evans. So that'll do it for my Joe Burrow captain group. Just going to rename this real quick. And then I'll create a second group, and it'll be a Tua captain group. So I'll go down and find Tua in the captain spot, make him my key player. And then once again, I'll go sort by position, and I'll add all of the Dolphins pass catchers into this group, starting with Tyreek Hill. And again, these guys I'm putting in the general group. I'm not making these guys key players. They're in the secondary group. So it's just Tua as a key player, and then all the other Dolphins pass catchers in this secondary group. And I'm including running backs in all of these groups. Okay, that'll do it for this group. Same thing. So Tua, I think the consideration, I'm not going to be setting this only apply plus minus adjustments. Not really even a consideration with Tua, just because he has not been much of a rusher in his career. He does most of his damage through the air. So if he's in the captain spot, you're going to want at least one pass catcher to be in a flex spot. The real question here is, if any key player is, do I want to set this to 2? And I think that's something you could consider with Tua. Say if any key player then use at least 2 players from this group, because he does so little on the ground and so much through the air. And also the same concerns that I have with Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle, they're expensive enough that if they put up a really big game, there's a good chance that they're outscoring Tua. Their salaries aren't that much more expensive. So it's kind of a thin line for, those guys to make it into the optimal without outscoring and becoming the optimal captain instead of Tua. But so what I'll do is I'll probably keep it at 1. I think that honestly, I might change that to 2. I think that is something you could definitely consider, changing this number to 2. And then I just give a smaller boost once again to Waddle and Hill. And then bigger boost to every other Dolphins pass catcher. Running backs, maybe not. Maybe I just, you consider giving no boost at all. I don't know how much of a boost you really need to be giving those running backs in this situation. I'm more interested in giving boost to these pass catchers. But I think that'll do it for the Tua group. Another group you consider making. I'm just going to do a Dolphins pass catcher. And for this group, it's not just going to be one player in the key spot. I'm going to go and find all of the Dolphins pass catchers who are in play as captains, and I'm going to add them all as key players. So Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Gesicki. And for the purpose of this group, I'm only including players who are exclusively pass catchers. I'm not including, the running backs who can do damage on the ground. All right, that's probably good enough for the pass catchers who are really in play. I guess I'll add Cedric Wilson, Trent Sherfield. All right, good enough. So now we've got these 7 receiving options as key players. So this is for lineups that have these players in the captain spot. Then I'm going to go through and I'm going to add those same players to another group in the flex role. So I'm adding Tyreek Hill as a flex player in my secondary group, Sherfield, Wilson, Craycraft, Waddle, and then also Gesicki and Durham Smythe. All right, so now we've got all of these guys in a group, and what I would consider doing for this group is saying if any key player are used in this group, so if any of these guys are in captain, then use at most one player from the secondary group. So basically, you're saying, if I have Jalen Waddle in the captain spot, I don't want, more than one other Dolphins receiver in the flex spots. Again, we're concerned with threading the needle of if we have, three Dolphins pass catchers in the optimal, then what are the chances that one of them is the optimal captain instead of Tua? Because if there are three, being supported, then there's a good chance that Tua is having a big game to support those three pass catchers. I don't think that I'm going to set this rule that saying at most one. What I'll probably do instead is just say only apply plus minus adjustments and basically say if I have one of these guys at captain, I'm going to give a negative boost to every other receiver because if a receiver is in the captain spot, that probably means that they are getting a good amount of the volume from that team, a lot of the passing volume. And that probably means that every other receiver is not having as big of a day. So there's some negative correlation with the other receivers in the lineup when you have a receiver in the captain spot. So that's a lineup I would consider making. You could do the same thing for the Bengals. You could also consider making a lineup that says, here, I'll show you. This is maybe a group that you should consider making. Tua flex because Tua does so little on the ground. Make a lineup with Tua in the flex spot as your key player. And then add in all of those Dolphins receivers again. And then so the one difference here from the pass group is I also have to add them in as captain spots because now I don't have Tua in the captain spot. So I'd like to also include his receivers in the captain spot. That spot is not taken up in this group. A lot of players here. All right. All right, so now you could consider making a group that says if you have Tua in a flex spot, you've got at least one player from all of these players. So it's every receiver in either a flex spot or in the captain spot in your lineup. You just don't want to have naked Tua in your lineups because he does so little on the ground, and every time he throws the ball, his receivers score more points than he does. So it's kind of a fine line to get Tua in as a flex player without bringing along at least one pass catcher. So you could do this group. You could also say only apply plus minus adjustments if you wanted, and then give boost to all these players. Sometimes I give bigger boost to the captains, to his receivers in the captain spot. But that's another group you consider making. You could also consider doing the same thing with Joe Burrow and just say only apply plus minus adjustments, give boost to all of his pass catchers in lineups where he's in the flex. These are just ideas of groups you could make. I've also made groups in the past that said things along the lines of I'd make a group of running backs in the captain spot and give boost to the kickers and defense in those groups. I'm not sure how viable those groups necessarily are. Those are groups that I have stopped making, but you consider making them because if the running back is in the optimal spot, in some cases, that means it's a lower scoring game. I think more likely in high scoring games, the passing games are doing really well. So if a running back makes it into the optimal, I think it's maybe a little bit more likely than that the kickers and defenses also have good enough games to make it into the optimal relative to the pass catching options. But I don't feel strongly about that group, so I have stopped making it. Just an example of another group you could consider making. But I'll keep it at these groups. I typically only make a few groups, and it's usually those quarterback groups on most slates. And then what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll say, here's how I do. So I go to the captain tab. On most slates, I'm going to say I want to cap every captain at 20%. So I'm not going to get more than 20% of anybody in the captain spot. And I'm going to crunch 150 times. And look at my lineup. So I've got Tua in the captain spot. He's got 2 receivers in the flex. I'm happy with that. I didn't make a group for Joe Burrow in the flex spot. This group I probably would have been able to get anyway, but for this lineup, you're going to need Burrow to be doing a lot of damage through the air to Mixon. Probably they're going to need to put up some points in the receiving game because Burrow doesn't have any other Bengals receiving option in this group. So that's something to consider. Do you want this to be a possibility? Do you think this is a likely outcome that Joe Burrow makes it into the flex and none of his other receiving options other than Joe Mixon make it into the lineup? Something you could consider if you don't like this lineup, making that group I was talking about earlier. And here you see I have T. Higgins in the captain spot. Jamar Chase still makes it in as a flex. Joe Burrow in the flex spot. I think I'm okay with this. We only have, one Bengals receiver make it into the optimal outside of T. Higgins in the captain. So I think I'm okay with that lineup. Joe Burrow in the captain spot with Higgins and Mixon as receiving options. I'm fine with that. So I think I'm okay with all of these lineups, but you could consider whether you like them. And then just the last thing that I do, and this is also a big part of my process. I usually crunch several times, but I like to go through and look at my exposures on players position by position. So currently I'm getting 77% Burrow, 54% Tua. That seems about right. I'm probably okay with those numbers. My guess is they'll come down as I push other players up. Mixon 47%, certainly enough for me. Chase Edmonds 6%. Maybe I want Chase Edmonds a little bit more. Something I'd think about. Samaje Perine, again, this is one of those decision points that's going to be tough because he's clearly way too expensive for his role in the offense, but also not projected for a ton of ownership. So maybe I give him a little bit of a boost and try and get him in a few lineups. Alec Ingold currently can't make it into my lineup set. He's projected for 2.97. I have that minimum still set at 3. I'd like to get some shares of Alec Ingold. Not a player who's very involved, but he has run several routes this year already. He's had 1 carry per game, so he's kind of a touchdown or bust option, but at low ownership, he's a player that I'll consider playing some. Do I want to have Chris Evans even in my player pool? I don't know. I'll make that decision later on, but I'll give him a little bit of a boost to make sure that he's, could at least potentially make it into my lineup set. Wide receiver, same thoughts. 28% Tyreek Hill. I don't know. 38% Jamar Chase. 11.3% Jalen Waddle. I typically, my first concern is the guys that are getting virtually no ownership and thinking, do I want those guys to be getting a little bit more? That seems pretty low for Jalen Waddle, assuming he's going to play tonight. So maybe I'd give him a little bit of a boost. Again, this is something that I do very incrementally. I think I want more than 4% Tyler Boyd. He's only getting 20% projected ownership, and he always has the ability to spike. So maybe I'd give him a little bit of a boost. River Craycraft, if I want him to be in my player pool, I need to give him a little boost because he's below 3 right now. I'll just give him a small one for now. Same thing for Cedric Wilson, Mike Thomas. And of course, as I add these guys in, it's going to cut into my Trent Sherfield shares. I don't think I want 55% Trent Sherfield. I like him. I think he's a solid play on the slate, but I don't think I want 55%. And just by adding these other players into my player pool, I'm going to be kind of spreading out what that ownership is going to look like. And keep in mind, at any time you're adjusting a projection, it affects every other player on the slate because projections are all relative to each other. So as I push up Tyler Boyd's projection, that pushes down T. Higgins' projection relative to Tyler Boyd. So these are all considerations if you are going to go my route and change actual projections. These are kind of the dangers. So that's why I typically recommend newer players just using that thumbs up and thumbs down for any player that is above 3 fantasy points. If they're below 3 fantasy points, obviously, and you want them in your player pool, you do need to go in and actually adjust the projection to get over 3. Hayden Hurst, Mike Gesicki. I know that Mike Gesicki, at least as of now, is somebody I'm going to want in my player pool at only 9% ownership. He has not been very involved in the passing game so far this year. They said before the year he wasn't going to be as involved in the passing game, but we also know that he's a talented receiver. He's caught all 6 of his targets so far this year. He's got a touchdown. He's a guy that can have spike weeks. So I think it would be a mistake to not have him in some lineups. Durham Smythe, a guy I'm going to want in some lineups as well. And then these guys, Mitchell Wilcox, I'll give him a little bit of a boost to see if he can maybe make it in. Devin Asiasi, I don't know if I'm going to have Devin Asiasi in my player pool, to be honest, but I might. And looks like I'm getting a ton of Evan McPherson. That makes sense. He's projecting really well relative to Jason Sanders at a lower price tag. I've given everybody else boosts, so I'm going to get a little bit less Evan McPherson naturally. Maybe I'll give Jason Sanders just a little bit of a projection boost if I want a little bit more. And then defenses, again, haven't decided what my approach to defense yet today, but I'd probably give these guys a little bit of a boost to make sure that they are still getting into my player pool as I'm giving other players adjustments. And I'll crunch again. And looks like now I've got Joe Burrow in the captain spot with 3 pass catchers. That looks good to me. Tua and Tyreek making it in. Solid there. Yep, these lineups all look fine to me. But that's kind of my process. I'll go through and typically look at these and look at my exposures and the lineups, and I'll crunch, 20 times some days. Not every day. There are some slates where I end up crunching, 5 or 6 times, and then I'm satisfied with my results. But some days I end up crunching several times, and that's just kind of my process. And I'll go through, look at the lineups, and then I'll go through position by position. Am I okay with all of these exposures, and make decisions based on that? Again, not getting a ton of Mike Gesicki, probably giving these guys a little bit of a boost. Maybe not Aussie. That's probably more than enough Aussie for me. But these guys I'd probably give little boosts, and that's just my process going through, looking at them over and over until I get exposure levels that I like and lineups that look the way I want them to. Good luck tonight. Hope you can win using this or a similar process.